I've been thinking a lot lately about systems. I work as an educational advisor to the Token Engineering Academy, people principles of design for crypto economic systems. And lately, obviously, we've seen a lot of crypto economic systems fall apart. So I've been thinking about the principles that would prevent that, how systems could be designed and tested and implemented so that we wouldn't see these massive collapses and things would be functional. I want to start by just thinking about what is a system. So on the left, I have a Sega Master System video game, and on the right, I have a model of a heart. And these systems have some common properties, and they also have some differences. If you turn the system off, can it restart itself? How much damage can this system sustain and still be functional? And what happens when the system sustains small amounts of damage consistently? Does it accumulate, or is there the opportunity for repair? For a lot of us, this is going to resonate because organizations are systems. So whether we're working in a small startup or at a large university or in anything else that you can imagine, or a large corporation, we're typically working with other people and organizations. And all organizations will have some kind of structure. There was this belief in the recent DAO revolution. Someone actually told me a DAO is just a group chat with a token. Like someone told me, you don't think of a DAO as a company, you think of a DAO as a vibe. There was this idea that if you just hang out with the right people, they'll figure out what to do. And I think that we've seen that's a little bit naive. There's a really great essay on this by Joe Freeman called The Tyranny of Structurelessness, which discusses the fact, it's from the 1970s, comes out of the feminist movement, but it discusses that no matter what you do, when you get a group of people together, there is some structure. And if you're not intentional about that structure, it can create things that are toxic. So it's important when working with a system that you have some level of intentional design. And in an organization, that you're clear about your structure. However, I'm also a big believer that structure does not have to be what we might think of as a traditional structure, which largely comes from military structures that emerged in the 20th century. So when people think of a well-structured organization, they often think of something that has strong command and control, where there's one clear leader and everyone knows their place and their role. And hierarchical systems can work very well, but it's not clear that they work well in an age where information is as free-flowing and there are as many possibilities to be had. So even the U.S. Army War College was researching the fact that a traditional hierarchical organization may not be capable of dealing with the level of information that we are dealing with in the modern age. So there's this really great essay, Hierarchical Organizations and Information Age Technologies, a Strategic Mismatch, published by the U.S. Army War College. I think it was 10 to 15 years ago. But they're citing earlier work from a sociologist who's very underrated named Mary Parker Follett. And Mary Parker Follett in the 30s was examining the weaknesses of a command and control structure. So often as leaders, it's tempting to think, if everyone just listened to me and did what I said, things would run perfectly. And we really want automata and not collaborators. But that doesn't work in an age where you need people to be able to do things that they're not trained to do specifically or ordered to do specifically. So my thought on this is that we want to design systems that are capable of learning. If a system is capable of learning, then any experience that it survives becomes beneficial information. I think about this because I was a professor and a teacher for about a decade. So my job was to build learning systems in the classroom and to make sure that people were learning. And I took that very seriously. I wasn't the type of person who just stood in front of the class and lectured. I really tried to make an engaging, entertaining, and interactive environment where I was building a community where people could learn from each other. I think that this idea of learning or resilience or healing is the key to creating systems that can survive shocks. And as many of you I know are familiar with the idea of anti-fragility, I think what makes a system anti-fragile when it's composed of people is the ability of the people to learn. As long as they survive the experience, it becomes beneficial information. Now, you can think about a learning system as being composed of people, but you can also think about the other components of a learning system or the other design models of a learning system. What I like about the idea of a learning system is we've all been in one if we've been in a classroom, but you can also take the same idea and say a neural network in machine learning is a type of learning system, or a cat is a learning system. You could think of any organization as some type of learning system. It is learning to do something. And what it is learning to do is a consequence of how we design it and how we. So I want to ask you all a question, and I have an answer in mind, but I'm curious to see if there are other answers. What is the oldest organization you can think of in terms of age that is still functional for its original purpose and largely in its original form? So it should have the same name that it at some point. Like it should have the same basic identity. Congress. So how old is Congress?
76, or I guess 1812, so close to 200 years.
Close to 200 years. Okay. And
I
what do you
would
think has
say,
enabled? What's that?
oh, no, no, sorry.
What do you think has enabled Congress to survive almost 250 years?
Having a military to support its interests and the federal government. Yeah. Maybe that, I don't know if that's the best example because I guess government's a little different. Does it have to be a business organization
No,
or just
no,
like,
it doesn't.
yeah.
So I
Okay.
think the government is a great organization. If you think about Congress, I would say it has a very clear structure. And actually, going back to the Constitution, it's a system of checks and balances, right? So the there's feedback for Congress from constituents, and there's also a balancing mechanism with the Supreme Court, the president, the three branches. So if you just have so I think that's a great example of an organization that survived by being well designed with self-correcting mechanisms and principles, so like it can learn from its mistakes.
Love it. Anyone else got some good suggestions?
Sorry, I interrupted last time. I was thinking the Catholic Church.
That's what I was thinking. I would say the Catholic Church is, depending on where you place it, at least 1,500 years old and probably older.
True.
But it also has a very clear structure. And I would say that the structure of the Catholic Church, at least as I understand it, is you could map out the structure. You could draw. I was thinking about the success of the Disney Corporation. There was the fact that you could actually have this new technology of animation and movie projection back in the 20s and 30s, where someone could draw that there were compelling characters and that you could interact with those same characters over and over again and learn about them. And even with what's happening right now with Twitter, there are reports that it's experiencing technical difficulties. In a normal situation, that probably would be something people noticed, but they wouldn't necessarily attach a significance to it. But in this narrative of so many people are resigning, Twitter is on the brink, it has a very different feeling. So systems exist within a narrative, and the ability of an organization or a system to create and control its own narrative is extremely important. It's almost, there's this idea called hyperstition, which is an idea that creates itself as reality. And I think that the successful organizations often utilize this principle, even if they don't realize it. So now I have a question. There's this idea of decentralization. What is the oldest decentralized organization you can? So now we're thinking in terms of decentralized, and I wouldn't say the Catholic Church is decentralized because of its emphasis on a single leader and the Pope. But if you think of a decentralized organization, what's the oldest decentralized organization you can think of that would still be functional for its original purpose and largely in its original form? So I'll give you my answer here, which is I would vote for Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous meets the definition of being decentralized, that if the central governing body, for some reason, still shut down, you would expect the local meetings to continue. Any local meeting is not dependent on receiving orders from the main governing body. And in fact, there's a lot of thoughts about the fact that Alcoholics Anonymous is actually an anarchist organization, because one of the principles of AA is no one can compel anyone to do anything else. Or no one can compel anyone else to do anything. And it was actually called benign anarchism by one of its founders. Regardless of what you think of the effectiveness of AA as a medical treatment, it's been a very successful organization in a decentralized manner. And I think that we're seeing this trend not only recently, but it's part of a larger trend. These things we're seeing with DAOs and cryptocurrencies are really much older ideas that are just now being technologically enabled. For instance, the Bitcoin white paper was an amazing achievement, but it's part of a larger ideological trend of private money, which was identified by the economist Hayek in the 1970s. And even Peter Thiel in his book 0 to 1 said that with PayPal, he was trying to create a private currency. He originally envisioned PayPal as a competitor to the US dollar, not just a system for transferring digital dollars. I had some degree of experience with this. I was aware in Asheville, North Carolina, of an alternative currency that was actually physical silver coins. This would have been back in 2004 to 2006. And there were about 50 local businesses that would accept these notes and coins. There is a similar system that's survived for a long time called the Berkshires, which is a local currency rooted in the Berkshire Mountains. And local currency is new. Unfortunately, the founder of the Asheville Liberty Dollar was arrested and is still in federal prison. And we've seen a lot of people who have dealt with the consequences of trying to build their own systems that might have rubbed up against and encountered conflict with larger centralized systems. So just briefly, I want to say I think we're living in a different world where these ideas are becoming increasingly widespread, and it's increasingly important to think about them. And if I were going to offer one principle that I think is necessary for this world, it is the idea of playful iteration and a learning system not by enforced learning, but learning through experience and engaging with things. I like to use the analogy of baseball or soccer. When you think about children who are learning to play a game, they don't start out with best practices. They don't start out in a large stadium. They don't start out with realistic velocities. They start out playing the game as well as they can understand it within the environment they're in. So they might not even have a ball. They might have a rolled up piece of paper. It might be 2-on-2. But you can learn a lot by doing things the wrong way, as long as you're set up so that you can learn from those experiences. You can see what's working and what's not. My favorite example of this is the famous problem of giving people a strange collection of resources and asking them to build a tower. So this study has been repeated many times, that you ask a group of kindergartners, a group of CEOs, a group of lawyers, and a group of MBA students, and they are given 1 marshmallow, 1 yard of string, 20 pieces of spaghetti, and 1 yard of tape. And they're asked to build the tallest tower they can. And consistently, when you give them this constraints, the kindergartners usually win. Kindergartners, then the CEOs, then the lawyers. And the MBA students do very poorly. Obviously, the MBA students know more than the kindergartners. but that's not necessarily an advantage. The MBA students often spend much more time arguing about whose idea is best. And the kindergartners just jump in and start building with what they have, and they realize that if they get started, they will figure it out as they go. So I think that's the best principle for dealing with a very chaotic world and with designing the systems, is designing the systems so that there is room to improvise and adapt. And as long as you survive the experience, you can turn it into beneficial information. So that's what I have to share. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to discuss anything I've said or any thoughts you have.